Hello, hello, hello. It's Bell to Bell, VIP Boxing's podcast, and I think we're on episode 89. What a week it's been, and this is the week to listen to the podcast and leave a review. There's so much to talk about in boxing this week. Leave us a review. Join VIP Boxing's YouTube site. Loads of fights up there from last weekend, where John Evans did a 5.5-hour shift. He slept for about 2 days since, but you're with us tonight, John. Have you recovered from your marathon with Andy Evans before Josh Warrington helped you for about 20 minutes?
Yeah, he even ducked out of one, Josh, didn't he?
Yeah, I saw you, yeah.
That was easy work for someone like me, Steve, just sat there talking about.
And I'm not just saying it because you're my pal. It looked really good when I was looking at them screens behind you and I was listening on the earpiece. I thought Andy and yourself were very, very good, keeping people up to date with the boxing. Little anecdotes were getting thrown in by you. It was good.
It's very difficult to commentate on something like that because everybody knows sort of what's going to happen or what's expected to happen. So we don't want to hear you talking about every punch. It just needs to be easy listening, and a few little stories makes it go a lot quicker.
It was good. And with us today, this week, we had to have a journalist. So my favourite journalist, and he's the most knowledgeable boxing journalist out there. I think him and maybe Ron Lewis for knowledge have a bit of a race. I mean, a lot more. There's other pretenders out there, but they wouldn't name you 3 British champions. Trust me on it. But it's Chris McKenna of the Daily Star, Daily Express, Daily Mirror. I don't know what paper you don't work for, Chris. Thanks for joining us this week.
No problem. I'll give Ron the nod on the knowledge. I'll give him on the knowledge. He's got that game. He's got that. So I'll leave that to him.
But there's only one place to start to look at. Conor Benn has failed a drug test, an adverse finding. One thing when it all broke last week, what I missed from the newspaper days at the News of the World and Daily Sport, is when a big story breaks, Chris, the buzz you get from it, wanting to work it, and you're a little bit annoyed someone else has got it, but you're sort of pleased for them, but you're not. What's it been like for you the last few days? And what was it like for you, Chris, when the news broke and either you knew it was broken or your desk rang you and told you to get onto it?
Yeah, I was actually on a day off. I was trying to get I've been quite busy with football stuff, so I was trying to grab a quiet day. The workouts were on. We were told we weren't going to get any interviews with the fighters until the press conference on Thursday. This was before everything kind of broke, and I was sat at home on the sofa. I was kind of lucky. I was supposed to go out and play golf, but the weather was that bad. The course was closed, so it was kind of a bit of fortune. And I was just browsing on my phone as everybody does, and the Daily Mail story comes up on my Twitter feed, and you kind of go, wow. First you think, is that is it a dodgy link, or is it actually true? It was that kind of shocking. And you click on the link and you read it, and you read the byline of the reporter, and you instantly, know that it's right. You got to check it yourself. You got to make sure it's right. But when you see like a name like Riyadh on it, you know that it's going to be bang on. He doesn't do punts, as we call them in the game, as you know, Steve. But it's always going to be, especially when it's on cases like this. So, yeah, your initial kind of reaction is one of like, I would have loved to have broken that story. Not that I love that there's potential drugs going on in boxing, but you're thinking, there was a story there and I kind of missed it. And you kind of get that bit of jealousy. But as you say yourself, you doff your cap to him and you say fair play to get a story like that. It's on there. And it's an important story as well, because we should know about these things going on in the background. And that's where I think as well that it's been an important week to remind people why we need journalism, why we need top journalists to working on stuff that so this stuff does get uncovered when it's going on. So from that moment then, it's literally WhatsApp's pinging away, making phone calls, trying to make sure you get all the facts right. You see a statement coming from Matchroom and Wasserman pretty quickly, not long after the statement from the board. And so it's just the rest of the day is just trying to make calls, trying to get the next kind of step in the story. And obviously that then dribbles on. So we kind of heard around 4 or 5 o'clock that there was potentially going to be some sort of a hearing on Thursday. So that was kind of the story to take it on for the next morning newspapers, that Thursday was going to be D-Day for this fight, which it turned out to be. There was a few more things that went on. And then, Thursday, get myself on a train down to London for a press conference that was apparently still going to happen. And it was delayed just as I was setting off on the train. But the fact it was delayed was giving you the indicator that they were still pushing to keep this fight on. So then you get down to London, and spent most of the rest of the day hanging around the fight hotel and still making calls, and the chaos of that. And you're watching people, you're seeing people like, you see Conor Benn leaving, you're getting a good feeling that this fight's off. You're seeing Eddie Hearn coming and going, whatever he's up to, whatever kind of things he's having to try and keep the fight on. And then you start to see the undercard fighters leave, and then you really know, well, they're not even going to bother here going ahead with the undercard. Because they've been all just hanging around in the hotel as well, kind of basically unknown what was going on. And then, so a whirlwind few days, and it keeps rumbling on. It's Friday, you're making more calls and stuff, trying to get another follow-up Saturday, Sunday. And so kind of had a day off today. So I'm praying that there's nothing that comes out. So, but you never know.
Well, I was going to say it was a massive story, and Riyadh got it, but it's not a quick hit, is it? This isn't going to disappear like a lot of drugs tests seem to disappear within a week or 10 days or get overshadowed by the next big fight. This one feels different, doesn't it? It feels like this could be like a moment where everything has to change. So are you now looking what's next, but branching out to other things, Chris, that could potentially flag up?
Yeah, I mean, look, you always got to look ahead and like, what's the next step? One, for the fight. I kind of wrote this morning, Monday morning, that it's not going to be rescheduled now until Conor Benn's the case is resolved. Either, well, if it goes one way, it's definitely not being rescheduled. But they're not going to push ahead, as far as I'm aware. They're not going to go. A few things were mooted. One was going to Abu Dhabi, and because obviously Eddie Hearn has got a deal out there now, and they're doing a show there in November. They're not going to do that, as far as I'm aware. They're going to let Conor Benn kind of fight his case, and he should have the right to do that. I think people kind of jump to conclusions, and yes, it's a adverse analytical finding. There's an issue with the drug test, and I think it should come out. I'm sure Conor Benn's people will think differently on that, but he is now entitled to his due process. Now, it's where do we get that due process? Does it take a UK anti-doping test to get that? Can the board look into it in more detail? Can they then make a kind of a definitive decision? I know they called a halt to the fight, but on whether was this an accident? Was it contamination? Was it taken intentionally? Was there a reason? What is it? So we need, Conor Benn now deserves his kind of time to explain his story, and how he will do that, we don't know. It's unlikely to be in public. It's probably going to be dealt with by lawyers and stuff like that. So the story's going to rumble on. It's obviously a massive thing because of the fight. It was going to be a big fight. The names involved, everybody knew the names, so it's not just going to be forgotten about, as you say, John. It's going to rumble on. But yeah, I think we need to start looking at other things, and that's one thing is transparency, and should it be made public when people find when there isn't an issue with the A sample, or I'm sure people within boxing argue that they should have the kind of, I suppose, confidentiality. And there is that if you UCAD. This was a UCAD test. What would have happened was he would have had to go to a national anti-doping panel hearing, explain his reasons for the substance being in the sample, etc., and then they would make a decision whether he should be suspended or not by the British Boxing Board of Control. That kind of happened with the Dillian Whyte case, and they decided at the time he shouldn't be suspended, but we're investigating the matter. And that only came out because of a website story around that. Whereas with this one, it's quite different because it's VADA. There's not that same confidentiality agreement. Chris Eubank was made aware of it, and his team. So we need to look at that. Should it be made more public? Should everybody know when there's an issue? Or there's positives and negatives from that, and one of them is obviously Conor Benn's name is now dragged through the mud. If he clears his name, great. If not, it obviously looks bad. And the argument from maybe his team side would be, in 3 months or in 3 weeks, if he clears his name, and this was all a big massive misunderstanding, he's missed out on a 2, 3, 4, 5 million pound payday. He's wasted all that training camp. The fight mightn't be rescheduled for 6 months or anything like that. But I still think there needs to be investigation. And everybody in boxing would surely hope that it is all a big misunderstanding. But if it's not, we need to know the truth. And I think that's where I think there should be more transparency on issues like this.
Yeah, just for throwing it, well, cheers for that. It was very excellent insight there, Chris, and explained very well. But where do you think, I'll ask you first, John, does it, British boxing right now, some of us, as I say, you know, he's entitled to a fair hearing. The Dr. Usman Sajid's been brought into it, and there's no suggestion of any wrongdoing by him. You know, some of the PR of people hasn't been very good the last week, and the public perception of boxing is at an all-time low. I mean, people come up to you when you're in a bar, know you work in boxing. I'm sure you've had it, Chris, and you will have, John. Oh, it's all bent. Now they're going to say, they're all on drugs, these people. You know, where are we now? And what throwing it forward, what can make big British boxing respectable again? What will people think? Well, there's an effort being made. I'm serious here. I think there should be parliamentary intervention and a parliamentary select committee hearing, calling everybody involved in this last week, and other people involved in boxing, small hall promoters and other big promoters and boxers, for their opinions. I don't know what you two think. How do we get the public perception turning again? What do you think, John, first?
The first thing we do, but whether it would resonate with the public, I don't know, because a lot of the general public only tune in for events like this, don't they? So they're not going to take notice of the little minutiae and the little rule changes and things like that, which would be big for us, but they wouldn't even know it's gone on. But the board have got to get on. Drug testing's got to be across the board, hasn't it? You can't recognise one testing authority and not another one. Or how can you take into account their readings if they're not the authority that you listen to? So I think that's got to be done straight away. But everyone's got to be reading off the same hymn sheet. They've all got to be looking for the same substances as well. You know, that's got to be, any little loophole that can be closed has got to be closed. But it's going to be very difficult to persuade the public that things have changed. You know, Benn and Eubank gets rescheduled, then it'll still be, Ben's a drug cheat. It doesn't matter. You know, it doesn't matter. There's shit sticks, doesn't it?
Yeah. And
you can never lose it for as long as you're around, you know. So as long as Ben's around, he'll still be referred to over this fight. I can really struggle to think of a sweeping change that would change public perception. I just think it's the way people look at boxing. It's the Wild West, isn't it? You know, anything goes in boxing. I think it's just got that reputation, and people have probably stopped being surprised by things like this, sadly. It's just another scandal in boxing. Look at all the ones we've had recently, from Daniel Kinahan in Ireland to Tyson Fury and his uncastrated wild boar to Dillian White and Oscar Rivas. It's the Jack Catterall, Josh Taylor scorecards. It's just one thing after another. And I think it's just a general, probably, opinion that casual fans have got of the sport, really.
What do you think, Chris? How do we win the casual fans over again?
I don't know how I suppose, winning them over and that is a hard thing. But one thing I think needs to change it is with VADA. When the Voluntary Anti-Doping Association is a great thing. Margaret Goodman does a lot of good work, investigates into brain damage and issues like that as well. And she's got a real passion for boxing. I give her that. But the voluntary anti-doping needs a proper process. Now, whether that needs more funding for winning boxing, but there needs to be a process. So it can't be just that we do a test and there's an issue with it and we tell everybody within the fight. There should be, we do a test, if there's an issue with it, we tell everybody in the fight, and you call the boxer to a hearing, and like they do at UCAD. And then in the hearing, you look at the evidence, you look at other test results, you look at everything put forward by both sides, and then a decision is made. And that's an independent arbitrator then. The problem with, if you go through it and it's up to the British Boxing Board of Control, or it's up to the Nevada State Athletic Commission, they're people invested in boxing. So I think it should be better that it was the voluntary anti-doping, basically, like UCAD have a national anti-doping panel, that they have their own panel like that, that whether they be judges, arbitrators, and medical experts, and they sit on this panel, they look at all the evidence, and they make a decision, and they say, right, you provided this A sample, we looked at the B sample. We know that 99% of that is going to be positive, but we looked at the B sample. We've looked at your evidence that you put forward. We looked at the evidence by the testing agency put forward. We've considered what the authority and sport, whether that's the board, British board, or in America, whichever board over there, and then they make an independent decision whether that boxer should be suspended or banned. And that's the only way to do it. There's no point in paying for VADA if you're just going to go, well, here's a test result and do what you want with it. And that's basically what VADA do. It's basically, here's the test result. It's now not up to us. It's up to you guys. I think they need to have their own panel, their own hearing, independent people that can look at this, that are not financially invested in either the fight itself or the boxers or the sport on a whole. They're just independent. They understand the sport. They understand the dangers of the sport, which is very important as well. But they also understand the science, and they understand what's a real excuse, what's a rubbish excuse, etc., etc. I think that's the best way to do it. Because then you've got an independent body. UKAD, it does that to an extent, but they're very underfunded and getting enough testing. I've reported on in the past, the amount of tests they do and compared to the amount of boxers they do, it's increased in the last year or so, but it's just not good enough. There needs to be more and more testing. And I don't agree that there should be confidentiality until they go through the appeal system. And that's with all boxers that happens. I think it should be made known if somebody has provided an issue with their A sample, and then they go through a case like any other kind of thing. I know it's not criminal.
Surely a fight can't go ahead if someone's failed, if someone's A samples. This delaying the opening of the B sample until the fight's too close and then piling pressure on that we've got to get the fight on because we've not opened the B sample, so we've not had due process. That's terrible. What if someone's pissed really hot and they just choose on a VADA test, they choose not to have a B sample opened, but they've not failed a UK, the same situation, but it doesn't come out. And how many times has this happened in the past? You can't have somebody going into a fight when they've failed the A sample. It just can't happen. No. It can't happen.
I agree totally. And yeah, it would be unfortunate if you did have an issue with your test and you missed out on a fight and you missed out on earnings, and it turns out that it was an innocent mistake and you shouldn't be banned. But it's such a dangerous sport. Yeah. I think that's going to have to be a risk. It's just going to have to go down. That's just the process, and we have to deal with it. And hopefully that people can step back and see that if people are cleared at a later date, and I'm not just talking about Conor Benn, I'm talking about the whole sport, that people can go, right, he's had his process. There was an issue with his test. He's gone through the process and he's cleared his name. He's not a cheat. And that's the way it should be.
Do you think maybe people should start speaking up about things as well? Because we've all heard stories and rumours around the gyms and whoever you speak to are rife about IV drips after the weigh-ins. We've all heard that. We all know the people who are suspected of doing it, and it's common knowledge. But none of us say anything, do we? And do you think it's because you can't get anyone to go on record? Do you think it's time that the honest people within the sport should start speaking up a little bit more? And you can't name names, but bringing these subjects to light so that it's out in the open more, so people are looking for these things.
Yeah, definitely. As you say, getting somebody just to go on record and say something,
impossible.
You would need more than that, because they would be libeling themselves, and you'd be libeling yourself as a reporter if you reported it. But yeah, there needs to be transparency. The IV drip thing, there's no testing for, so you don't know whether somebody's done it. So that's an issue within the sport, and that's probably up to the British Boxing Board of Control.
That's banned against UKAD, isn't it?
Yeah. Because if you were doing it, you could flush your system if you did have other stuff in there.
But before we kind of, because we've flown this for once. I haven't got a word in. You two have been like, it's been great. I've been sitting here just listening to you two. It's been very good, actually. But before we go on, talk about the social media involvement in this and the Dr. Usman, who's been linked with it. Now, this guy's been hung. I'm not saying he helped himself by taking websites down. As I said earlier, there's no suggestion of any wrongdoing. But I just think that some of the stuff that's come out about the doctor is just incredible. I don't think, I'm not saying he's guilty of anything. I've got a third time to emphasize that. But this interview he's done that came to light on Saturday, there was, other stuff last week on his Facebook site, pictures of the fighters he's worked with. And I've just all the doctor stuff. Now, if there's one thing that's made me smile during all this is when I think it was Paul Swift mentioned him, the doctor giving him daggers in the dressing room last year before his brother fought Anthony Fowler. But here's a fella here. Is he being unfairly hung, drawn and quartered like Conor Benn? Well, not before he's even had a trial. He hasn't said a word. I know he's got a shit hot London legal team on it now. What have you made of it, John?
All of a sudden, he's at front of centre, isn't he, of this entire story? And you know what? He goes into if you were to have a dinner party of great characters who appear from British boxing, you've got Dr. Oz, you've got the man in the hat,
I told you that,
and you've got Steve Collins, his hypnotist. They're the three. I'm sure there's a couple more. These characters appear, don't they?
Yeah.
But that's part of boxing's problem. These characters with no background in the sport, it's said time and time again, it's the easiest sport in the world to infiltrate boxing. And these characters who've got no background in it, they find their way into teams, don't they? Now, Dr. Oz might have done absolutely nothing wrong. We've got to say that, haven't we?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm just saying we talk. What's been on social media?
It leaves the door open for people who might not have the interests of a sport. They're just trying a shortcut to the top to make their name, to get more work, to get jobs, to be noticed. Boxing's wide open for people like that.
What's incredible, he's got a bald doctor's license, which he's entitled to get. But a couple of promoters I've asked in the area he'd work in, none of them ever remember him working a show. But he's a bald medical officer. What do you make of the doctor being brought into it, Chris?
Yeah, look, he's been around boxing in a while. We worked with other fighters. We don't know, but what I would say is that I think the board are right when they've said that Riyad did another story today as well, give him another nod. Just saying that the board are investigating his comments.
Yeah, because he's a board license holder. That's why they can investigate him, yeah.
But it's his comments, not
comments, of course,
not anything else. Because it's the comments on that podcast where he says 80-90% of people in the sport are potentially doping. And I think that needs to be looked into, because if you're a doctor with a British Boxing Board of Control license and you believe there's that many people doping, then you should be brought in to explain yourself.
That's right. That's right. And as we said, if a boxer or a trainer went and said 90% of British fighters or big name fighters are doping, they would also be called into the board. So I don't think they're singling out the doctor here. But look, we're running out of time. We have to move on. Fellas, the fight this weekend, Savannah Marshall against Savannah Marshall against Claressa Shields. Tell me about it. John, you're a big female fan. What's going to happen?
Do you know what? Exactly the same as we said a month ago, whenever the fight got postponed quick. I just get the feeling Shields might know a little bit too much. I think Marshall might end up... Peter Fury's a good trainer, but one thing his fighters do fall into a little bit, I think he's waiting and following and waiting for that perfect shot and perhaps not being as active as they could be sometimes. And I just wonder if Shields might hypnotise Marshall a little bit, just do enough to pinch the rounds and win a decision. But Shields could get finished, couldn't she? Because Marshall can bang. But money on the line, I would back Shields.
Yeah, I said the same a month ago, just Shields, but I'm not going to have a penny on it. How do you see it, Chris? And do you think what's happened, or do you think what's happened in the last week is really going to overshadow this fight Saturday night?
I kind of hope it doesn't, because they deserve the profile for this fight. They're putting it on. It should have happened last month, and obviously what happened at the Queen's death just before it, and it was probably the right decision to call it off at the time. So I hope what's happened in the last week doesn't overshadow it. I hope they do get the kind of exposure and that they deserve. And how do I see the fight going? Quite similar to John, I think. I just think, obviously, they fought in that 2011 final, or not in the final, in the Worlds. And you just think, Marshall got the better of that day. But you look at the development of both fighters since then, and as good as a job as Peter Fury's done with Savannah, I just think Shields has improved that a little bit more, and she'll edge it. But no kind of outcome would shock me in this fight. Yeah.
And finally, this week, we can't wait, or I know I can't wait. You know, one of the great things you would have thought is if Deontay Wilder's back against a Robert Helenius, is what I'm trying to say. is there any comeback this year where you're looking forward to it more just to see what a man's got left? And I'm really hoping he shows there's plenty left, because if he does, he could fight anyone in the heavyweight division again. I don't want a Deontay Wilder to get in there and look an absolute shadow and shot to bits against Robert Helenius, because I love the guy. I think he doesn't get the plaudits he deserved. I think he's a tremendous puncher, one of the great punchers, and I'm just hoping that there's plenty left. Because if he is, it's another magical sort of thing, man, still in that top 3 or 4 in the heavyweights.
There's two things in there. You know what? The power's never gone. He's still going to have the power no matter what. We've got to see whether he's gun shy or whether he just comes apart when he's hit, because he took a lot of punishment, didn't we?
Yeah.
In 2 of those fights in particular. But yeah, fingers crossed, because that explosive one-punch power, he's still the only guy who's got it in the heavyweight division.
Yeah.
You know, all the other guys can finish people and take people out, but for a one-hit quitter, Wilder's still the only one who can do it. So fingers crossed he's got about another 18 months and we can get some good fights. Him and Joshua's still fireworks, isn't it?
Chris, let me ask you this. I had the pleasure of spending a day once with Deontay Wilder in Sheffield in the Box Nation days, making a film, and I found him great company. I don't know whether he's one of these lights camera action men like Foreman who suddenly lights up when the media is in town. You've been around him a lot recently. How do you find him as a bloke, Chris?
I find him brilliant. He's a brilliant interview. And we must say he has said some things that are wrong. I don't agree with his comments on killing somebody in the ring and all of that. But when you do sit down with him, he's so engaging. He's so... He's like electric. He lights up. He always has a kind of an answer. He's always thinking. He's just a massive character for the division. And my fear is that, as John says, the power won't go, but the timing might. And I think that timing is so important to him, because he's not the biggest guy. And it looks, and again, we're only looking at clips, and we've seen before that training images can be very deceptive, but he looks to have slimmed down again, which I think it's a good thing, because I thought he was too big in the second and third Fury fights. He was just carrying too much weight. I kind of get why he did it, but he carried a bit too much in those fights. But an engaging character, quite a warm character as well. Actually, I didn't spend. I remember Declan Taylor telling me a story. He went over to see him, I think, before the first Wilder fight, Fury fight, and he was just great to be around in the gym, and he was just life and soul of the party. And he's got massive family, just seems to be always on the go. And like, I remember before the third fight, I managed to get an interview with him on the phone, and you could just tell he was just knocking around in the background, making his kids tea and stuff, but he wasn't being rude. He wasn't not listening to the questions. He was answering everything brilliantly. He was really good. So you get that from him. But yeah, what a fighter to watch. And if he's got a little bit more left in him, I'd still watch another Fury fight. No, it's not the thing. We don't need it. We certainly don't need it. But the Joshua fight, my days. He gets a couple of wins. Joshua gets a couple of wins. That'd be a legend. I don't think we'll see it. I just think there's too much history there. But wow.
Well, Joshua Wilder's fireworks, isn't it?
Yeah.
Wilder Joyce is what gives first.
That's the fight. Yeah, that's the fight.
Wilder Ruiz. I'd love Wilder Ruiz. Wilder against anybody. Put anybody in there, and I'd love it. You know when he was over in Sheffield? Was that when him and Fury ended up in the ring at the Magna Centre in Rotherham?
It might have been. I can't remember. It might have been. He was over for. He's got a lot of friends in Sheffield. So he's got a guy he's latched onto from Sheffield, who's been with him, and he comes over and he stays in Sheffield. He actually went to Batley to open a gym or a chip shop who his mate owned. And when I did this thing, and I can't remember when it was over, he wasn't fighting. He might have been the time in the Magna. He was pissing about up with him in the day, and he was great, honestly, a gentleman. And I thought he can't be lights, camera, action, because he's not dropping a guard, and I'm around him too long. And then before we went and did the interview at 6 o'clock at night in this hotel in Sheffield, he said he wouldn't do it until I shouted "Bomb Squad" outside. So I'm outside the hotel shouting "Bomb Squad." Just as you say, Chris, a very engaging character.
I remember being at the Magna. It might have been when Jazza Dickens fought Kid Galahad. That's how long ago it was.
Yeah, I can't remember.
And just as everyone was clearing out and people were going back to the cars, Fury and Wilder ended up in the middle of the ring. This is 10 years ago, isn't it? Having a singing competition and a face-off. And so that's how long those two have known each other.
It must have been talking. 10 years ago.
What a rivalry.
It was quite early Box Nation days. So I think you're right, John. It might have been about 2013, 2014 at the latest. But anyway, we're going to go. We've been on for 35 minutes. We don't hang around on this. Chris, you were terrific tonight. And thanks for the insight on what it was like operating last week and your opinion on what should happen and going forward. You were an excellent guest, better than Ron Lewis, and you can tell him that from me.
No chance. Get Ron on next.
Yeah. John, thanks as always. You must be sick of boxing after your commentary stint on Saturday and everything else for the last few days. So you have a few days off and make sure you wake up on Saturday for the big ones.
I will do. We could have done with a couple of stoppages Saturday. It was a long shift, wasn't it?
Oh, it was a long shift. Good night. We know what, some of the fights weren't bad. You get a lot of these 40, 36s. They did come and try and test a few people. It was good. It was decent. Thanks a lot, fellas. And thanks everybody else. VIP Boxing signing off.
For all boxing info, news and latest interviews, amateur and pro, across the north, click and subscribe. VIP Boxing Promotions. Also, Twitter, Instagram and Facebook.